Hello again. Now, it's something nobody really wants to imagine or even think possible, do they? But what if someone you love was killed by a speeding driver? Obviously, you'd be consumed by grief. But could you, in your grief and your rage, find it in your heart to forgive them?
Well, that's exactly what one extraordinary family have done. Relatives of Brian Herrick pleaded with the judge not to jail the man responsible for his death. Delighted to say we're joined in the studio by two members of Brian's family, his son Richard and sister Kathleen. I think a lot of people watching this morning would be astounded. I think it's one of the most unbelievable things I've ever heard. Can we hear a little bit about the story? Brian, I believe, dropped you all at the airport. You were heading off.
My sisters and I were going to Spain and his partner for a week's holiday. So Brian, he came down to stay with his son because I'd brought Richard up since we were 3 months. And he drove my sisters and I and his partner to East Midlands Airport. And on the way back, he stopped at the traffic lights on the 453. And this lorry came, heavy goods lorry, and went in the back of him and Constantine at his car. So he was killed instantly. And the detectives missed us about three seconds before we took off. Oh. And so they didn't catch us. So when we arrived in Spain, just landed, a message came through to say that he'd been killed, and we was screaming, we was devastated.
I think the most extraordinary, and I know Kate would agree about this story, is that the lorry driver was in court.
Yes.
And you as a family practically begged the judge not to jail this young man. Now, it's not for us to make assumptions, but why? There will be people watching saying...
Well, we didn't think we'd done anything special, but Luke, he'd got a young wife, he'd got 2 children, he'd got a mortgage, and we said, you know, we don't want this young man to go to prison. He'd already, for the 18 months, obviously been carrying it around in his head.
Carry around forever, to be fair.
That forever, for the rest of his life, so that's punishment enough. So we didn't want him to go to prison because we wouldn't benefit by it. His young children and his young wife wouldn't benefit.
It's a wonderful way to look at it, but I think a lot of people, when consumed with grief, you obviously loved him dearly.
We did.
There's a very human rage against what's happened that comes out, isn't it? A wanting to punish. How did you quell that and find it in your heart to forgive?
Well, my sister Margaret, she'd always stressed, because she's just a bit older than me, and she'd always said, you know, oh, we couldn't possibly send him to prison. You know, putting somebody... He didn't set out.
I think what's really interesting is what you just said, Kathleen. You said that you didn't think you'd done something extraordinary.
No,
actually, in this world, it is seen as extraordinary. I remember somebody once saying to me a long time ago that when something so bad happens to you, if you don't somehow find forgiveness, you will spend your life locked in that misery and in that grief,
absolutely.
and that's the way forward. But you went further. Richard, this was your dad. Not only did you and were you part of a family saying, don't jail this guy, you hugged him outside court.
Yeah, that's right.
Difficult, or...?
Yeah.
I mean, trying to, you know, your dad, I mean, that must be hard enough, but what you've done is an extraordinary gesture.
What did it feel like, hugging him?
And his wife?
It was hard. Like, you know...
Glad you did it?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's extraordinary, isn't it?
It is.
Would Brian have done exactly the same? That was my question.
Brian, he was a very kind, caring man. He was a strong, silent man.
So he would have done exactly the same?
And he would have done exactly the same. So we as a family have always been brought up to care for people because people cared for us.
Well, listen, absolutely.
Well, you've got some good karma coming your way, I would think, after that. Wonderful.
Kathleen, Richard, thank you very much
indeed.
Thank you very
much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.